We are live. Devin, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, Zach, thanks for having me, dude. Always good to talk to you, but I appreciate this opportunity in particular, just to share some of the stuff I've learned. Maybe some other folks can avoid, stubbing their toe on the same corner, from some of what we'll talk about today. So I appreciate the opportunity and the invite.
Awesome. Yeah, and just as a reminder to the audience, the purpose of this series is called the Vision Selling Series. And I was just at an event called Arise, and they talked about the purpose of a vision is not so that you achieve it, but who it makes you become today. And trying to embody characteristics of what that vision looks like, and why not just live that out today. So my goal was to bring on badass sales leaders like Devin here, and be able to kind of just share some wisdom on your kind of just background and career and everything going on. Just an intro of Devin. Devin's been in the sales world for a while, leadership roles at places like App Dynamics and Data Robot, and now Instabug, which is very exciting stuff. And just really happy to have you on here, Devin.
Yeah, man. Again, really appreciate the invite, and shameless plug for you all and what you're up to at SIF. Like, I think you're on to something really special, and I appreciate what you guys are doing. And again, thank you for the invite to be here today.
Yeah, I'll always take the plug, even though I promise I didn't tell Devin to say that.
Yeah, I'll be looking for $50 in my
as I slide him a 50 under the table. But yeah, like, I'd love to just start. It was so funny. I was looking back to, like, how did I meet Devin? I actually cold prospected into Devin, and I like to think of it as more like warm prospecting, because what we are doing is finding the right people to contact. But I had reached out to Devin, and you can imagine being in your entrepreneurial journey, you get a lot of no's. In sales, you get a lot of no's. And Devin had this really well thought out response to my cold outreach. And it was kind of the perfect response at the perfect time. And he said, "Hey, if you guys are doing what you say you can do, this is exactly what this market needs." And I really, I just wanted to say, I really appreciated that. And then I got to know you a little bit, and it was all about like EQ based leadership, and like, it's all about relationships. So like, from the very start, I really felt that with you. So I really appreciate that. So yeah, and you were random. You were like the first person one of the first people that knew that me and my wife were pregnant randomly. I had just found out that we were pregnant, and I say we loosely, it's really her.
Smart
but
man.
I was just so excited, and it was like this stranger that I felt a connection with. And I was like, yeah, no one knows about this, but we're pregnant. So I thought that was kind of cool. But just a little background on how we met. I think it was like last December or so.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
But yeah, I'd love if you could just kind of start, why'd you get into sales, and how'd you really break into this profession?
Yeah, I mean, I remember being young, and it's just me and my mom for the majority of my upbringing, and she's a dance educator. And so she had followed a very different career than the one that I eventually embarked on. And I still remember we would get in arguments, and she would say, "Devin, you are destined to be a lawyer. Like, you could talk yourself out of a cold." And it was infuriating for her. But so I always knew, like, I had all the words, right? I had a way with words. I could motivate, I could inspire, I could connect. And frankly, that was all before I knew what emotional intelligence was, which I eventually figured out EQ was my superpower, and it was something that I could invest in, getting ahead of myself. But that ultimately, like, I knew at a very young age, cultivating relationships, right? And being able to navigate those to drive outcomes and things. Like, I always knew that was a capability that I had. And when I was in college, I got very enamored by entrepreneurship, very enamored by it, the allure of it, the sexiness of it, being a 30 under 30 kind, that type of stuff was really inspiring. I started a personal training company after a pretty nasty injury as I got really into weightlifting, and decided, hey, I'm going to pursue business management, like, as a degree in my undergrad studies. And I graduated in 2007. Where it was very clear, if you were paying attention, that we were heading for a recession. And so I continued to try different things from an entrepreneurship standpoint, but man, I had a lot of hubris, at like 21, 22, thinking I knew what it took to build a business and how to do it effectively, let alone in an economic downturn or a recession. And so bottom line, eventually I had to go find a job, right? And so I knew sales. I had taken some interpersonal selling and sales courses, which quite candidly were garbage compared to what I've been able to go through now in my career. But they introduced me to the concept of actually being a sales professional for a living. And so started doing my research, very coin operated, wanted to live a life very different than the one that my mother, who was a teacher, could provide for us. And so I started looking and I found this thing called inside sales. And, as right out of college, making 60 to 80K in a recession with great benefits and a really long-term opportunity for career growth. I'm like, well, shit, let's go. And so then it was, okay, that's an entry point for me as I started to figure out what this whole sales thing was about. Like, I'm not going to go get an enterprise sales job. I got to start at the bottom of the totem pole, work my way up. So then it was, what are the companies? And I did a lot of research and I found this company called BMC Software had this big inside sales department 5 minutes down the road, and they were hiring. And so I put in my resume, but I printed out my resume and took it because they were so close. I took it to the office, and I still remember meeting Maria, who was the office manager, who was like literally the gatekeeper, right? And she was like, well, I can't let you in, but I can tell you, I've never had a candidate do this before, like drop off like hard copy of their resume. And later that afternoon, I got a call back from the hiring manager and ended up doing what I needed to do through the sales process the interview process, landed a job there. And so I started my career in 2008 as a BDR at BMC Software, right before BMC acquired BladeLogic. And with BladeLogic came the name that I think many of us in the space know, John McMahon. And so I was very, very fortunate because John came in and really shook up BMC and implemented Medic and MedPick and the leading indicators. And I was so green that I didn't know any better. Who am I at 21, 22 to tell John McMahon, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm not going to listen to what you have to say. I bought in hook, line, and sinker. And candidly, I think the rest of my career is a story from that moment where I decided to commit to a sales process and a methodology. And the rest has been history. And I've been very, very fortunate since then.
Wow. I love the story of you dropping off your resume as a hard copy. I've always told people trying to break into sales, you got to be different. Like, you can't just think, oh, I'm just going to apply on LinkedIn or the website and think that you're going to stand out from a crowd of resumes this high. So hats off to you.
I had a little bit of the benefit, Zach. Like, I think at the time, there was like Indeeds and LinkedIn was just kind of becoming a thing. And so it wasn't as crowded. So like actually dropping off a resume was like, again, Maria said she had never seen it happen before. Nowadays, if you're just applying, there's almost no chance you're going to get the job. Like, you have to make connections through LinkedIn. You have to go be in person. You have to send handwritten notes. I mean, it's just too noisy. The market is too busy and people are too used to people just submitting a resume. And it's like, you're not special if that's all you're willing to do.
Yeah.
And so anywho, you start to see these trends. And like, I know I interrupted you, but I just can't agree with you enough. Like,
yeah,
especially now, you have to go above and beyond to stand out. If it's something you really want, then isn't it worth it? Right.
Yeah. And what a great talking point in the interview. They're like, oh, well, you don't have that much sales experience. And it's like, oh, well, I saw there were a couple hundred people that applied to this job rec. And somehow I got the meeting with you. Like, isn't this exactly what this SDR role is right. I was creative and found a way to get in the door. So like, I'm just demonstrating to you what I'll do for you at your company. So like that, I love that. That's awesome stuff. Yeah. So like a lot of people, we might have a lot of people that are junior sellers or they're brand new to sales and they're trying to take that leap into like an enterprise field role, or maybe they've got their eyes set on leadership. What's something a seller could do prior to that interview experience just to prepare themselves for that journey?
First thing, before you start putting stuff into action, which I'll talk about some suggestions, the first thing is to start with why, right? I'm a big Simon Sinek fan, but really I can't tell you how many times I do these chats that I freaking love to do. They're my favorite things in the world from a mentorship standpoint, that I call career architecting. And it's like, okay, you're telling me that you want to do this thing. Why? You don't even know what this thing really entails. So why do you think you want to do it? And so go find a mentor who's done that job, who's made that transition, and go articulate to them why you believe you want that role. And if they're a good mentor, they'll tell you if you're smoking something and that's not the reality of the role, or if, hey, your why is aligned to what this role is all about. Leadership is a number one example. Like I see a lot of people that say, oh, I want to be in leadership. Well, why is it? Well, I make more money and I get the title and this, that, and the other. And it's like, man, that is not going to be enough to sustain you and your mind and your heart through all the challenges of leadership if you're simply driven by some coin and some equity and a title. Like, you have to genuinely love seeing other people develop and succeed. That's the only way to really enjoy the job. And so start with why and find somebody who can credibly give you feedback on whether or not your why is aligned to what this role and that career path have to offer first. Then if you get some affirmation that, yes, this makes sense to me, then I think the number one thing that folks need to remember is nobody else is going to be responsible for your development. If you are lucky, you will have a handful of leaders over your entire career that actually give a shit about your development, like truly care about it and invest in you. Most, and this could be an entirely separate conversation, but most will do just enough, and they will rely on learning management systems and enablement teams and et cetera. And very few companies have really well developed like future leader courses and moving into field sales courses. So you've got to take the responsibility on your own is my number one recommendation. And so be a voracious consumer of knowledge. Go read books by guys like John McMahon, right? The Qualified Sales Leader. Go read things like Fanatical Prospecting and Sales EQ by Jeb Blount, right? There are so many books. There are so many podcasts that are out there. Just start finding those books, those topics, those centers of information that align to the role that you're looking to take, and just get busy. Start diving in. The next thing is go shadow people who are good at the job you want to do. Not one, multiple, because what you're looking for is the repeatability across each of these individual high performers. And what we need to remember is that sales and leadership is both a science and an art, right? So you are never going to be able to take this 20-year seller who's been crushing it top 1% for the past decade and just like mimic them out of the gate. And on top of that, it's not genuine. So it's going to come off all icky, right? Instead, go look at 4 or 5 top performers and see what are the common things that each of them do that is repeatable, that leads to success, and then make that your own, right? Like whatever that thing is, or those series of things, go make those your own. Study them, internalize them, and put your own spin on it. It's got to be genuine, right? And then, of course, finding a mentor who you can work with, who you can spitball with, who you can talk about companies, roles, territories, technologies, all of these things. And ultimately what you're looking for, similar to what we're talking about here today, is like, I'm asking you because I want to see if you could go back in time, if you would do it the same way as you did it. And if not, what would you do differently? That way I can do that out of the gate versus having to like stub my toe or skin my knee along the way. Right.
Yeah.
So those are some of my suggestions. But first and foremost, you got to take responsibility for it. You can't wait on other people to do it for you.
Yeah, you basically defined what I'm trying to do with the vision selling interviews. I'm trying to get those shadow experiences and find those characteristics, and how do we embody that? So that's great stuff. You mentioned one of the books you mentioned, Sales EQ. Seems like you're very very passionate about emotional intelligence and EQ. How can, first of all, if you could just talk to our audience a little bit about that, and then how could it sounds easy, like be yourself, but it's not that easy. Like how could someone embody a more EQ focused leadership style?
Yeah. I'll try and be as succinct as possible because it's a big topic, but the bottom line is there, IQ it's fixed, and everybody can debate it, but IQ is the ability to consume and interpret and action knowledge, right? Like reading a book grows your knowledge, not your IQ. How quickly you can read that book, how complex the topics in that book are, and how quickly you can internalize them and understand them, that's IQ. And it's fixed and it can only go down based on how poorly we treat our bodies and our minds, right? EQ is static, it's elastic. So there's actually lots of studies where they've looked at people, brain scan pre and post significant EQ exercise, and additional neural pathways are built from the emotional center to the rational center of our brain. So like some of us might be like born with a 1-lane highway of those synapses and neurons to go from the emotional state to the rational state. And over time, you can grow that to a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5-lane superhighway. You can get it to the Autobahn, right? If you work hard enough. And that means more quickly and more unconsciously can you maneuver yourself from an emotional state to a rational state. And I think most of us who look back on like really painful memories and moments of our lives, I would guess that 80 to 90% of those were because we acted purely out of emotion, right? And so when you think about, okay, so what does EQ mean applied in like a sales role? Who out there has read a book or taken a course on things like time management, stress management, presentation skills, interpersonal relationships, all of this stuff? Everybody. Who cares? The benefit of EQ is by watering that one seed of EQ, you flower all of those things that I just talked about versus tackling them individually. And EQ is about understanding myself. What am I feeling right now? Why am I feeling it? And then in the moment, being able to use that knowledge to appropriately respond to the situation, right? Versus like acting on emotion. Zach said something and it really pissed me off. And so I dig in at Zach, and now our relationship is fragile, right? It might never return to the state it was before. Instead, pausing and understanding like, Zach's not a bad guy. We're friends. He has my best interests at heart. And honestly, this thing that just triggered in me is about me, not about Zach. So instead of lighting Zach up, I need to find a different way, get myself rational, and respond differently. I think anybody who's sold, I don't need to further expound upon why that skill can be so incredible as a salesperson, because it also extends outward, understanding what other people are feeling, why they're feeling that way, and being able to take action on it. Like as a presenter in a big room, you say something and you see a bunch of people like sit back and, right? Do you just keep like, no, I'm going to pound on this point to the point where like your audience has completely lost you? Or do you recognize, man, I'm losing my audience. I need to shift. Maybe I even address what just happened in the room to clear the air and move on, right? It has so many applications, but especially to roles where you have to consistently interact with other human beings, and let's be honest, influence their decision. So that is why selfishly I got into EQ. But then I saw all the long-reaching and ranging benefits in my personal life, and it became a bit of an addiction, and it's been a lot of fun. It's been a long, fun ride.
Yeah, and I noticed you're leading a group focused on EQ. Like you mentioned a book. If someone was like, all right, I recognize this is an area of weakness for me, where could they get started just to kind of build on that and try to go from a single lane to the Autobahn kind of thing?
Yeah. Well, I do, and I appreciate the opportunity for the plug. I do lead a nonprofit called People First Professionals that is all about trying to give people a safe space to explore EQ and to grow it, specifically with the intent of applying it in the workplace. So feel free to check out peoplefirstprofessionals.org. We got a lot of good stuff. We don't charge any money. It's just, we think the world could use a bit more EQ and it makes a better workplace. So that's definitely in place, but our kind of like go-to is Emotional Intelligence 2.0 by Dr. Travis Bradberry.
I've read that.
Yeah. Anthropologist, heavily educated in these areas. And it's actually a workbook. It's not a read cover to cover book. So like, don't go buy the Audible, like buy the book. Yeah. And it comes with a test that takes about 5 minutes, and it gives you a baseline of your EQ score across the 4 core categories. And then it actually points you to specific exercises you can do that are going to help you where you're at in your EQ journey the most, as opposed to like a one size fits all. It gives you more of a prescriptive workbook approach. So that is the number one resource I suggest for somebody who's serious about pursuing EQ. If you're like kind of interested, but you don't want to get super serious about it, do things like watch your caffeine intake, especially in the afternoon, get good rest, try mindfulness and meditative exercises like journaling, gratitude, meditation, exercise, eat good, hydrate, read, get sunlight before noon. Like these are all ways that basically what we're doing is we're decluttering that pathway that I talked about. So although we're not like actively improving EQ through study and exercise, we are opening up and interacting with those pathways that is telling the brain, hey, we need to clear this out. We need to make some more room. And that will somewhat organically help you raise your EQ if you're not all the way committed to focusing on EQ itself as a study.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. Definitely an area I want to focus on. I went to that Arise immersion it was all sales leaders and entrepreneurs. And coming out of that, I had a 365-day commitment to morning meditations, and that has changed my career. It's only been 46 days since that immersion. However, I'm seeing an incredible change. So that's awesome. You mentioned that book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0. I definitely owe it a redo of the exercise. I did it in 2017, so a little bit ago, in the Aspiring Management program at Oracle. It was like a hardcore 4-month program, and that was a part of it. And I just remember I laughed out loud because you score yourself, and someone was like, "Wow, I got 100% on my test." And it was so ironic because it's like so low EQ to say that you're perfect at everything and have no weaknesses. So that just always stuck out to me. It was so funny.
It is one of those tests that you can fake your way to 100 if you're not honest with it. But you're spot on. That's nobody has perfect EQ. And if you think you do, you have a lot of self-awareness to work on for sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's big time. Going back to like just breaking into a job in software sales, maybe it's someone that's just trying to get to that next level again. Like you talked about the interview and you crushed it and got that first role at BMC. as a sales leader, you've interviewed hundreds, if not thousands of reps, right? So what are some things that stand out to you as this wowed me in this experience? It was memorable and they got the job and then they were successful. That wasn't a flash in the pan, like they were able to fake it till they make it kind of thing.
Yeah. I will say there's been very few times where a single moment has like blown me away so much that like, we have to hire this person. And I actually fight that urge actively and intentionally because it's easy. I mean, we've all made, passion purchases and things like that where we're just, oh, I need this, let's go. And then only to have buyer's remorse. And so my number one suggestion to anybody out there interviewing for any sales position is you would be amazed how many times I interview someone and they talk about how great they are at doing discovery and setting agendas and running calls, right? And all of this. And guess what? They don't do it in the interview, right? So like, stop telling me that you're good at something and show me. The interview should be an example of how you perform in a sales process, plain and simple. So why should I believe you that you're good at all these things if you don't send me an agenda up front? If you don't set the agenda in the beginning of the call, right? If you don't drive the call, if you don't ask second and third level discovery questions, if you don't qualify the questions I'm asking you, if you don't send a timely and valuable follow-up, like why on God's green earth would I believe that you're going to do that in a sales process with a customer if you're not doing it for a job that you tell me you so desperately want?
And I'd add one thing, go for the close.
Yeah.
Right. You're in sales, ask for the job.
Exactly. And so that's my thing. Like, don't say what you do what you say. Right. And like, there is nothing that is a bigger turnoff than somebody that's like all pumped up chests and talking about how big game killer they are and this, that, and the other. And yet they haven't displayed a single ounce of sales best practice through the sales process. Like, it's like, man, you're a good talker, but there's nothing here for me to say you can actually do this in real life. Like, you're good at talking about it, but you're not doing it. And so that's my number one. It's like, if you don't know what those things are, go study best practices for running meetings, for driving a sales process, and to go put those things on display consistently. And I think that ultimately is what has wowed me, is when people not only do all the small things, but they do them well and they do them consistently throughout the sales process. Like, there's another where I will intentionally get pretty high on somebody and tell them that I am. And I want to see if they start getting assumptive about, the job is mine. And all this stuff that they showed me at the beginning starts to back off. Ooh, no. You stopped before the close, man. You got to take it across the finish line, right? That's one of my favorite tactics. Like, I'm super excited to get you on board. Like, let's get this thing going. And then to see if some of those best practices start to fall away because now they feel like almost this is theirs, so they're entitled to it. So be consistent, do the right things. Those things add up more than any single thing you can do. That is how you differentiate yourself, in my opinion, with a really good sales leader.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'm loving everything you're saying here, man. I know we were gonna talk about like a key win you had, maybe some learnings, but not sure if we should plug that question in or if there's anything else for our audience that you just think is worth talking about. I know we got a couple minutes left here, but
yeah, man. I mean, I think when we were going to talk about the deal, I thought about a win, but I actually more want to just plug a loss for people. And I see
you're in the best from the losses. It's so tight.
Well, we should.
Yeah.
And my piece of advice here is seek the no. Like, be unafraid and seek out the no. Because I see time and time again where, oh, I've got somebody who's talking to me. Maybe I've had a tough run of PG, pipeline gen, and now I'm just, finally somebody talking to me. And we are afraid to pursue the no because we don't want the bad news. First off, give yourself some grace. You're a human being. No human being likes bad news. But what you're missing in that equation is the lost opportunity cost of the time you're spending with that opportunity that is only going to end in a no matter what you do. Like, how many other opportunities could I have found and closed if I had gotten that time back, right? And I had one opportunity in particular. I actually eventually ended up doing business with this company 2 jobs later, like 2 companies later, with the same person. But I knew, like, my pipeline was a little bit weak. I was still a fairly junior seller, new in the enterprise role. And I had this company, we were going out to dinners. I was meeting lots of people. We had lots of good engagement. But I knew deep in my heart, like, I'm not uncovering enough pain. There's not enough here. And I didn't really push my champions. I didn't really test them. I'm like, yeah, are we actually going to get something done here? Or, like, is this enough to justify an actual contract? Because I knew the answer was no. I knew it was, but I didn't want to admit it. And eventually, as you imagine, that fizzled and died. And there were some very uncomfortable QBRs that followed that, right? But I was afraid to hear the tough news. And I will never know what amount of commission I lost out on by over rotating to that deal, to that safe place that made me feel good, right?
Yeah.
That's okay. You're human, but don't find bad deals as a way to make you feel good. Go find some other stuff. Go find the good deals. Ask the tough questions. There's nothing worse in sales than a maybe. No is like is the favorite, right? But go get the answer.
I feel like every listener on here is like, they've got some scar tissue that they're like, ooh, I know exactly what he's talking about. I've lost my fair share of deals. So I know exactly what you're talking about, but kind of taking yourself out of it, like you said, it ties back to the high EQ, being able to take the emotional side out of it and more just think about if I want the business, I don't need the business kind of thing. How should I be running the sales cycle? But yeah, no, Devin, this was an incredible conversation. I really appreciate your involvement here. How can our audience kind of follow you or subscribe or connect with you? What's your social medias or what type of outlet
I'm not big on the social medias, but I do have LinkedIn. That's like the #1 place you can find me. So look me up on LinkedIn. You can also check out peoplefirstprofessionals.org, which is my passion project that we started about 6 years ago. Just trying to connect good people that have a people first mindset, give them a network and skills to develop their career and to do so the right way. That's going to have a positive impact on the world around them, not just a selfish, wake burning impact, right? So go check those out. And, look, I'm a little biased, but I think we're on to something really special at Instabug. And we are constantly hiring across a number of different positions. It's a great culture. It is a world-class product that is innovating, outpacing everybody else in the space in mobile, which is growing. So I'm biased. I'll be the first to say it, but I think we got something pretty special. Check out Instabug, see what we're about. And if there's some openings that you think might be interesting to you, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and I'll take a look and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah. And if you haven't been in sales long enough, the leadership team and the hiring manager, very underrated in part of your decision-making process on picking a job. I don't know, if I was on the market, Devin would definitely be someone I sought out. But
appreciate that.
Definitely a big part of it. You definitely want to find leaders like Devin that you can kind of learn from. And like he said, try to find really good mentors. So Devin, I really appreciate your time. I know we're over here, but this is a great conversation. And for the audience, there will be more vision selling interviews coming up with some other badass sales leaders. So I appreciate you tuning in or listening to this recorded. So have a good one.
All right.
I will end the